Hi, everyone. This is Katie Sweetman of Empowering Astrology, and we are going to be covering the eclipses. So this webinar is titled The Eclipses of April and May of 2022. Every 6 months we have eclipses, and they are pivotal points of change and transformation for everybody, and especially if you are the sign that the eclipses are falling in. So this is for those who are Scorpios and Taurus, a very special time. I'm just going to continue to let people in as we go on. So again, as I'm recording this is April 28th, 2022. And this is the eclipses of April and May of 2022. So my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer, and I'm also a psychic medium, and I live in the New York City area. And I know a bunch of you watch me every week, and we do our live look at the astrology. And I like to do these deep dives on particular subject matters because I think it gives us time to really go deeper. I had started empowering astrology back in 2010, which sounds like another lifetime at this point, because for me, I wanted to express myself and talk about astrology in the way that I wanted to talk about astrology at the time. Believe it or not, there wasn't really a lot of people on social media talking about astrology. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to go through some sort of background information. And I'm the kind of person, I think it's important for us to understand what eclipses are instead of them being this sort of thing that happens every 6 months. Maybe it's the scientist in me, maybe it's the person who has a very technical mind, but what are eclipses? What are the lunar nodes? And believe it or not, lunar nodes are very key in making eclipses happen. So we need to understand what the lunar nodes are. And astrology is about time, these different moments in time and these intersecting arcs of time. And this thing about eclipses that they make time feel a little bit funny. They speed things up and they punctuate different moments of our lives. And then we're going to talk about what makes the eclipses of April and May of 2022 so special. And then, of course, what does this mean for your sign, both your sun sign and your rising sign, for example. So let's begin. Ooh. So eclipses, they open a doorway, and I'm personally very fascinated by eclipses because they're so evident, and I'm pretty sure everybody who's watching, if things feel a little bit weird right now, it feels like things are sort of speeding up, or there's that sense that something's going to happen. And I think that eclipses, they sort of create this vortex or a doorway or a portal where an old life leaves, a new life comes in, sometimes dramatically, sometimes not so dramatically. And like I said, time speeds up and it bends, and there's the sense that we are turning the corner. And the thing, for example, about these eclipses that we are experiencing, they're the first pair of eclipses that are solely in Taurus and Scorpio. So we're sort of at the beginning of something. But as we'll discover as we go further in this presentation, it's not quite the beginning of something. In a way, it's something is coming to a head that has its roots over the past few years. Eclipses, they happen every 6 months. I know this is a pretty basic point, but I want people to understand that this is something that happens quite frequently, every 6 months. Last time we had eclipses was in November and December of 2021. And the way that I see it, and maybe in the way that other astrologers see it as well, you have the opening of a story. You have that first eclipse, and in our case, that first eclipse was in November of 2021. And these eclipses are going to take us through Taurus and Scorpio all the way to the end of 2023. And there's like that final eclipse in Taurus in October of 2023. So this is like roughly an 18-month period. Sometimes just by the nature of how the eclipses fall, it can stretch a little bit into a 24-month period. So here's the analogy that I use for eclipses that hopefully makes them a little less mysterious. Your life, in a way, is like a theatrical performance. You're in it, but in a way, you also are an audience member. So imagine every 6 months, the curtain comes down on one part of your life and the curtain comes up on another. Now, sometimes the change of scenery that happens between the curtain coming up and curtain coming down is quite dramatic. People come in, old people leave, the set looks very different, or maybe it's sort of this next scene that's very crucial into understanding this bigger story of transformation. So here we are, we're on the verge of our next act, and Miguel has, my dog, is beneath me now, and he's got his ball. So I'm hopefully this is not too loud chewing. Anyway, it's a really potent time right now. And when I write about astrology, I try to give people a bit of a heads up, because it's not to make it sound too like a lot of negative things are going to happen. No, of course not. It's that people start to feel things around this time. Events feel a little bit weighted. There's a deeper subtext to everything. And this, we've been feeling this. I mean, here we are, we're recording this at the end of April of 2022, April 28th. The eclipse is on April 30th. But we've been feeling this come in, I would argue, since the beginning of April. So there's this sort of sense, this sort of pregnant energy, a sense of something is brewing. We're sort of on the cusp of something. And it's my belief that the eclipses are vortices of energy. You have to understand that on some sort of symbolic archetypical level, eclipses it hides the connection between the sun and the moon. And the sun and the moon are the twin forces of life. Now, the sun, of course, being the sun, it gives light, it nourishes us, but the moon is that sort of the yin to the sun's yang. And we need these two energies. We certainly need these two energies in astrology, because they really talk about the creation of life, the flourishing of life. But at this moment of eclipse, it's like it's cut. So in a very traditional way of looking at eclipses, there's a sort of the seesaw of life goes up and the seesaw of life goes down. It is not uncommon for the time around an eclipse for there to be somebody to kind of suddenly come into public view, or somebody who is in a position of power to lose that position of power. So for example, I know that Twitter was bought by Elon Musk. It was yesterday. Like seems very telling that it's around the time of an eclipse. So there's sort of this big dramatic change and shift, and even pay attention to what's going on in the news, like whose star is rising and whose star is coming down. That sort of is around the time of the eclipses. So each and every one of you has Taurus and Scorpio somewhere in your chart. And that's, for example, where we're going to have the eclipses next on Saturday, the 30th of April, but also 2 weeks later on the 16th of May. So there is some story that has been unfolding that part of your chart, I mean, for years, decades, depending on how old you are. And it's really interesting to see how eclipses will sort of connect different moments in time. So for example, the eclipses that we're having shortly, these eclipses, they in a way connect back to 2013, 2014. And that's when we last had eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, but they were a different location. Sorry, that's my dog. And then the last time we had eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio, that was in 2003, 2004. So does it mean that events from 2013, 2014 are going to repeat themselves? Of course not, but it does mean that these two different moments are threaded together. Personally, I think it's really important to know where the eclipses are unfolding, because you can anticipate change. You can anticipate that something about this part of your life is going to change. Maybe you can make empowered choices. On some level, eclipses, they sort of remind us that we can't control everything, that there's something that's larger, greater than us, time. Certainly this idea that astrology and sort of the mechanics of celestial time, like all you can do is just go with the flow or go with the time instead of trying to work against it. And of course, we're going to learn just where these eclipses are when we go through each of the 12 signs. Part 2, the sun, the moon, and divine alchemy. It's a little bit of an esoteric point, but then again, I'm a little bit of an esoteric astrologer. And as I said earlier, that the moon and the sun are the yin and the yang of creation. Now, a solar eclipse is just a new moon. It just happens to be a new moon that's within a certain amount of distance from the ecliptic. Same for a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is a full moon within a certain amount of distance from the ecliptic. These two energies, whether it's the start of a new moon and the start of a new lunar month, it's just the time of new beginnings, a time of creation, and we are living life through the archetypical lens of that sign. So we have, and I mean this symbolically, we have the symbolic energy of the moon, the mother, and we have the symbolic energy of the father, the sun, and they give life to everything. And the solar eclipse opens up a 6 months chapter. And then you have each subsequent new and full moon that nestles inside this 6 month arc of time. And then you have this larger chunk of time, this 18 months where the eclipses are happening in these signs. And then there's larger chunks of times with larger chunks of times. And so it's my feeling that our experiences, to kind of bring it back to a little bit more of a micro point, our experiences throughout a lunar month is our reality is really through the lens of the moon. I mean, as an astrologer, it's so important to pay attention to the moon. And I don't just mean this because it's pretty. I mean, the moon really talks about the ebb and flow and the tone and the subconscious energies that happen at any point. And you can sort of get a sense of what the collective mood is, how these things are connecting to our own mood, and how we are sort of each lunar month living life through a different lens. So the moon and Saturn actually have a lot in common. Maybe this is a little bit of a point that might be a little bit technical, but the moon takes approximately 29 days to go around the sun. Go around the earth. Sorry, go around the earth. Saturn takes 29 years to go around the sun. So there's this sort of parallel with the lunar cycle and the cycle of Saturn. And so we think about, well, if the moon is sort of this archetypical lens of our experiences, Saturn actually makes it real, it makes it concrete. Saturn is the sign of matter. And Saturn is also the sign of cause and effect and karma. And that's why at the time of the eclipses, we kind of feel like something deeper is coming up, a deeper story, a deeper lesson, and sometimes something that feels very karmic. As I said earlier, we can't control eclipses. We can just be present with them, and sort of this realization that we're coming to the close of something. I can't control that. You can't control that. But how do you work with it? So what are eclipses? And maybe this is some basic information, but I think it's really good for that we have this fundamental information about what eclipses are before we can get into the astrology. Eclipses are an astronomical event where the light of the sun or the light of the moon is blocked by another object. It's called an occultation. Wow, I can't say that word. So in the case of a lunar eclipse, the earth passes in front of the moon. And in the case of a solar eclipse, the moon passes in front of the earth. I think I just said that. Yeah. So that's how your eclipses happen. It's either the sun is blocking the light or the moon is blocking the light. So let's see if this actually works. There we go. That's what a solar eclipse looks like from space. So you can see how there's this patch of darkness because the sunlight is blocked in that space. Looks like the light is going over the Philippines, the Pacific, and north of Australia. And this is what a lunar eclipse looks like from Earth. So you'll hear some astrologers call this the blood moon. Just a little personal pet peeve. This is actually like nobody ever called it a blood moon. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But I think there's sort of this a little bit of hysteria about the lunar eclipse. Personally, I don't think we should mess around with full moon eclipses. This is really powerful energy. And this is just a personal esoteric thing, and something that you do you. I think we should be really respectful of eclipse energy, and I think sometimes people like go out and look at it, but there's this is a really powerful event. Like I said, this moment, where time or energy is cut, it's punctuated. And I think, I don't know, maybe there's the spiritual side of me saying this, I think there's something really intense about that. So yeah, we can predict where eclipses will fall like clockwork. And this is because the position of the lunar nodes. The lunar nodes, they, unlike the planets, well, they're not actual planets, they're actually 2 points in the sky that allow us to predict eclipses, but they move counterclockwise against the planets. So for example, when we did this webinar back in November, we were talking about the eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius, but now the lunar nodes as of January 15th have moved, and they've moved to the sign that's before Gemini and Sagittarius, which is Taurus and Scorpio. So we're sort of going backwards through the zodiac.